Welcome, welcome, welcome. Sunday Rants. I'm your host, James Harnsberger, and I am here and ready to go. It is September the 12th, and we're at 6 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. And I want to get right into just what we're going to talk about, this wrongful conviction thing. Again, I want to thank CalFIJA, who is the nonprofit organization helping to sponsor our efforts, and also is going to be underwriting and funding in-kind contributions on the effort that we've undertaken for the wrongful conviction of Jermaine Smothers, and I'll have some updates on that. So let's just jump right into it and talk a little bit about, we were off last week for the Labor Day holiday, and yesterday obviously was the 20th anniversary of the 9/11 event. What strikes me is, 9/11 was one of those events like, in history, like Pearl Harbor. People remember where they were when that happened. I remember where I was when John Kennedy was assassinated. We were let out of class and had to go home. And, certain events in history, sort of, you always kind of mark them in your memory, especially if they're tragic, and you know where you were when that thing happened. And I have to imagine that for someone who has been wrongfully convicted, they remember much the same way. And then you look back and you wonder, how could it be that we get caught up into patient? And even after the fact, with all of the evidence, particularly in Jermaine Smothers' case and thousands of others, when you look at the evidence that comes to light after the fact, sometimes many decades later, you can't help but ask the question, how is it that this stuff was not addressed or discovered during the original investigation, right? And this goes well beyond any standard of reasonable doubt, especially if you have witnesses recanting their testimony, or you have witnesses that come forward and say that they were coerced into testifying this way or that way. It's just the whole system is replete with example after example after example of where the justice system has failed, right? And it's not that the system has failed, it's the people in the system that are running it that have failed their charged duty for a host of reasons, not the least of which is their racial bias or prejudice, their predisposition to guilt of a suspect. Human beings are flawed and in a lot of ways, but I think what happens when it comes to the crime and punishment side of society and criminal justice system, the way it's set up and the way it's supposed to work is that we have these checks and balances to safeguard against the likelihood of an abuse or a situation that would lead to a wrongful conviction. The last check and balance, obviously, is the jury, the petit juror in a trial, in a criminal case, and that standard of reasonable doubt. And this is where, with all due respect to those in the legal profession in any capacity, I depart greatly from the conventional wisdom that just because the judge gives you an instruction to follow the law, you have no obligation morally or legally for that matter, to do anything other than what your conscience guides you to do. And if you think that the case is bullshit, then, vote not guilty. I mean, it's not complicated. We make it complicated a lot of times in these kinds of cases. And I'm going to be blunt, it's because a lot of people are trying to cover their ass and the sloppy work that they did. And they've got a dog in the fight in their own interest and not that of finding the real person that really did the crime. So in this particular instance, when we look at wrongful conviction, and it happens more than I think a lot of people really understand. I've had a lot of conversations with people, and I always find a way to bring the subject up indirectly and get their sentiments or their feelings. And it surprises me. I guess in some ways it does, in some ways it doesn't. What surprises me is more people than not really do have the belief that if the person was arrested or convicted, then they must have done it. And when I tell people the actual numbers of people that have been exonerated that were later found to have not committed the crime, the most common response is, I had no idea there were that many people. And I'm not being critical. Nobody has any idea because it's not something that affects us directly or of the magnitude like a presidential assassination or a terrorist attack or COVID, where where you were on the day that something like that happened. It's not in our psyche and in our conscience mind in a way that it sort of anchors and we have a presence of understanding or awareness that it happens. So with that said, I had a chance over the last week or so to actually get a call from the state prison where Jermaine is incarcerated. And we had a chance to have about a 25 minute phone conversation. It was very good to talk with him one-on-one and at least be able to put a person to a picture to a case and a bunch of facts and talk to somebody that's just, another human being and get the insight. And, what was just very surprising was the high spirit and the attitude and the engagement, talking with him, and just like two guys just, having a beer and having a conversation. I have to imagine that life is very different when you're incarcerated, and especially for that long for something that you didn't do. And it just surprises me that the willpower and the fortitude and faith in God and all of that he talked about is a testament to the ability to endure that, because I just would never be able to imagine what that would be like. We say I can only imagine. I can't. I could not imagine how that would feel or how that would be. I had a chance to talk with him a little bit about what our next step is. Behind the scenes, we've been working with a couple of key strategic partners, if you will, mapping out a game plan that is focused on outreach and public awareness in San Diego County of the issue of wrongful conviction and the great work of the California Innocence Project, but more importantly, highlighting and featuring the case involving Jermaine Smothers and his wrongful conviction, because that happened here in San Diego County. It was a murder up in Oceanside, and there are a lot of very fluid facts that have surfaced after the conviction, that when you look at these facts and you look at the circumstance of him being incarcerated, you got to go WTF exclamation point, like what the hell. And so I explained that our initial game plan, which will start here in the next week, is a sort of a soft launch, if you will, and an outreach to a number of targeted organizations, groups, civic groups, people of influence, key people politicians, churches, and whatever. And we're going to work through that over the next probably 90 days. And as we put together the email and social media campaign that we're going to be driving and getting some people to help us with our SEO and SEM on Calfegia, by the time we get into closer to the end of the year in December, phase 2 will actually be more targeted toward groups and organizations, maybe some speaking opportunities where we can go out and help educate the public in these various groups and organizations, and identifying key players, people with circles of influence that can help us widen the net of public awareness and outreach, so that we can bring forward the tragedy of this case involving Jermaine Smothers, but also to highlight and accentuate, if you will, the other tragedies of other cases, particularly those that the California Innocence Project is working on in doing the great work that they do. And so it's a lot of work, and we've made a pretty significant commitment financially to get this done over the next 12 months, in hopes that we will have at least a better understanding in the public about wrongful conviction at large, and more particularly the wrongful conviction involving Jermaine's case and other cases highlighted by the California Innocence Project, and even cases that aren't even directly related here in San Diego County, but in other areas of the state. There are hundreds and hundreds of people that are in the same particular situation that Jermaine is in. And it's breathtaking to realize how difficult in California, from things that I've read from Berkeley Law and other studies that I've read, by all indications, just from what I've read, it would appear that the consensus is that California is the worst state to expect that you're going to get anything called an overturning of a wrongful conviction. It just strikes me that that just tells me how broke the system really is, right? And the system, if you will, is set up such that it almost appears as if it refuses to be reformed. And I know that the politicians probably have good intentions, but frankly, with all due respect, blah, 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 it's just a lot of bullshit and doublespeak, because if they were serious about reform, they would do some serious reforms, structural reforms. The district attorney, I'm sure she's a fine human being and probably a very seasoned prosecutor and probably a skilled lawyer and definitely a skilled politician, because she got elected. That said, and again, with all due respect, nothing personal, but she's kind of tone deaf. And when you say something and then it comes out and people hear it and they think, did she just say that? I mean, like, really? Are you serious? It's like you're tone deaf. You're not connecting the dot, dot A to dot B, right? And if you're going to have post-conviction review, and you're going to lay all the cards out on the table, then let's do it where you have no involvement and your office has no involvement. In other words, appoint somebody that has the equivalent level of like a special prosecutor, maybe out of the state attorney general's office, or somebody that can be appointed by the court, independent of the court and the prosecutor, that can go in and have from A to Z, from the crime scene to the prison cell, when the person got locked up to serve their conviction, We want to look at everything. We want to see every piece of evidence. We want to talk to every witness. We want to look at every dot and every T and every iota in every police report. We want to look at every police investigator, every expert. How many cases have they had that have also had the same kinds of patterns of problem? Not that we're doing a witch hunt to go find a witch to burn at the stake, but to be honest, there are enough cases out there that you can research, like I've researched, where these investigators, these detectives, these police officers, and these so-called experts and prosecutors have a pattern, so much so that I think I spoke about this several weeks ago. In Texas, like 30 some odd convictions were overturned out of one town because you got a rogue cop planting evidence of dope dealing on people that had nothing to do with dope. The only dope was that they believed that they had an honest cop. And I'm not saying that all cops are not honest. It's probably a very small fraction, like any organization or group of people that are in that small minority that are just plain outright assholes and frankly shouldn't have a badge or any authority or connection with the criminal justice system, except maybe doing time for breaking the law that put somebody in jail to begin with. That's my opinion and sort of my rant, because it's infuriating, beyond infuriating, to think that if that many thousands of people that have already been exonerated, and I'm not talking about a dozen or two, talking several thousands that have already been proven to have been wrongfully convicted, what more evidence do we need that we have a criminal justice system that is an abject failure, right? It's the just us system. Screw you, screw me, and just us. We're going to protect our own. They have absolute immunity, it would appear, because even when the wrongdoing is uncovered, there's no consequence. Prosecutorial misconduct, prosecutors found to be suborning perjury, coercing witnesses, covering up exculpatory evidence that would otherwise have led to a not guilty verdict if the jury had that evidence and the defense had that evidence. You just got to scratch your head and you got to wonder, where are the checks and balances to reform a system when the system is set up that basically, it's like the fox guarding the hen house, sort of an analogy. Why would you do that, right? It's like tone deaf. So if we're going to talk about reform, let's start talking about reform that actually matters and all cards on the table, and take away the immunity and take away any of the protections that they can hide behind, and let the cards fall where they may. And if there is misconduct, if there is wrongdoing, then let there be some consequences. I'm sure there's a whole stack of statutes of crimes that they could be charged with, the least of which should be applied if they were involved in somebody else losing their liberty. And the fact that the real perpetrator of the crime, the murder, whatever, is still running amok, running loose, and God only knows how many other people they've killed, right? So the victims of the family of the person that was murdered is still suffering because there's doubt. I mean, it just goes on and on and on and on. It's just like, man, you just get tired even thinking about it. So we're not going to solve any problems, but we are going to be one of many voices at the table here in society, in our community, to bring and highlight the attention and focus of just some outreach and public awareness about the problem of wrongful conviction. And there's a billion reasons why it happens. So I'm not even going to get deep into the weeds about why it happens. The fact that it happens is enough. And we've got to do more to keep it from happening again and again and again. While that's being said, we've got to do everything that we can to figure out what more can we do to highlight the good work of the California Innocence Project, and what more can we do to bring focus to Jermaine's case here in San Diego County, and see how many people will stand up and step forward and say, what can I do to help? Because that's what we need. We need to get people together to figure out what we can do more of, to bring more focus and more attention, and maybe then people will start becoming more outraged like I am. I mean, I'm kind of calm today about it, but I get wound up like a French drum and think to myself, how is it possible that anybody could have any faith in this system when it fails so often and so deeply and so much? You can't. So that's about all I have for my rant tonight, other than remember that there's a lot of shit that goes on in the world, in our community, in our country, that doesn't directly affect us, right? And I get that. Wrongful convictions probably don't directly affect a lot of us, but we're all affected indirectly for the social cost that we bear, for the lack of faith and confidence in a system that was designed to work anyway but this way. It just sort of chips away at the foundation of the social order that we agree in our compact to be members of a society, and that we're supposed to be treated equally under the law, and it doesn't work. It hasn't worked. I mean, it's a great aspiration, and the promises of the Constitution and the Bill of Rights are great things that we should all aspire to. But I got to tell you, we fail a lot as a community, as a nation, in upholding those ideals and living by those standards. Because if they meant anything, Jermaine and thousands more like Jermaine, their ass would not be in prison for something that they didn't do. And the system would actually go out of its way to make sure it got fixed. And so all of those judges that sit on the bench pontificating all of their great orders to the jury to follow the law, basically what I got to say is talk to the hand, man, because, if I get called on the jury, I'm going to follow my conscience. Irrespective of what the law says, I don't have an obligation to follow the law if I think the case is bullshit. And this is a case that's bullshit. So I'm probably never going to be called for jury duty. Trust me. But that said, have a great week, and I'll have some more updates next week, because we're going to start here very soon in the next couple of days, rolling out our first outreach. And if you want more information or you want to help, just send me an email there at the bottom of the screen, scrolling along there. And I'm sure we can find something for you to do to help us get the word out. All right. With that said, take care, peace out, and we'll talk to you next week.